As you walk into the Sg&A sheet, you'll find that the first section of the sheet has the headcount. So remember, the Sg&A sheet covers most of the expenses that your company will make, and then for tech startups, usually the first and biggest expenses are going to be related to headcount. So let's start with that. So the headcount is connected to the staff sheet, and the idea of the staff sheet is to become a bit of a dashboard where you can control the size of your team and the roles inside your team and understand how they scale. So my best recommendation is to consider this staff sheet as a role-based sheet rather than a people-based sheet. Point being, for example, let's say that you want to hire a VP of marketing or a CMO. That's normally one role, it's one person, and you're only going to have one CMO for the duration of your company. So in here, what you can assume is their salary. So here, notice how we have an annual salary of $60,000, which might or may not make sense depending on where you're based. But it's $60,000. The monthly salary is $5,000, right? That's just what you would report to the employee, or at least that's how it works in the States. But then the monthly cost of that employee, of that role to you, is a little bit higher. There's an overhead on top of it for payroll taxes and for benefits and the likes. That you can control using the payroll taxes row column here. So in the US, normally that will probably round out to around 25%. And you'll see that once I change this will change the monthly cost of the company. So again, this is a number that's a bit of a reference on how you're paying the employee. But in reality, the number that you're going to be accounting for as an expense is this. Now, you can also define an annual increase for this role. So we'll say that the CMO role maybe scales 5% year on year. And then we come into the first hire. So when are we going to have this role start operating in the business? Let's say that we are going to pick July as a start date. And we're going to add one CMO in July, and we're not going to add any more CMOs again. So we'll keep the maximum team at one, because a company only needs one CMO. Now that's very different to how a senior marketing role would operate. So think of a senior marketing role here as an associate or as a senior person in the marketing team that works under the CMO. But as a role, this may be somebody who's doing SEO or somebody who's doing paid media. But we think of this as a role rather than a specific person for each of these activities. So let's say that we'll keep the salary there, we'll increase the benefits. Maybe their salary doesn't scale as quickly, and maybe they'll start working a few months after the CMO starts. But the difference here is that we're going to hire an additional marketing role like this every quarter until we get to a team of, say, 10. So again, the advantage of the staff sheet is that you can run these role-based projections with only a few inputs rather than having to go every quarter and adjust the number of people. So let's see how that looks on the Sg&A sheet. Notice that here on the headcount, we can scroll to the VP of marketing role and see how in July we'll have the first role starting, and then a few months later we have the senior marketing person starting as well. And again, notice how this sticks as 1, but this changes to 2 and 3 and 4 people all the way up to 10 at the end of the model. Now, if you, for any reason, need to do customization to this, so for example, you want to start with 2 roles or you want to hire the second person sooner, you can overwrite this, right? So the way to do that is to just literally to overwrite the value here, and we'll set this to 2. Maybe this hire was delayed, and we'll set this to 0. And set manual values and then keep the scaling value after that. Now, what's really important when you do that is that you manually adjust or highlight these values as inputs. Normally what I like to do is change them to blue, change the font, and sometimes even highlight the section of the row to say, well, yeah, we've added a manual input here. Another useful way to keep track of this is to put a note here and say there are manual inputs. Now, you generally want to avoid manual inputs because it becomes a bit of a hassle to maintain them all, and you tend to forget. So again, the idea of these different scaling methods is to allow you to avoid that and to just use this dashboard to control how staff scales. Now, one mistake that I often see companies make is to think of these as people and to actually name each of these roles as someone on the team. That's valid at the very beginning. Maybe you have 2 people who both are marketing associates, but they're making different salaries. So probably in that case, you want to consider them as different roles inside the company. But again, as you scale with time, you want to sort of group everybody into the same role. And of course, for simplicity, keep them all under the same salary. Now, the rest of the Sg&A sheet works for other values or other general expense categories that we would consider part of SG&A, like marketing, like professional services, like rent. One note on professional services, by the way, is that if you're going to be hiring contractors, but they're going to be ongoing contractors who are going to be part of your team, my best recommendation is to actually use the payroll taxes and benefits column to convert them into a contractor. So essentially what you're doing is you're hiring these people as contractors, meaning their payroll taxes and benefits will be zero. But they'll still be an ongoing role, and potentially you're going to be scaling that role as well. The point is you'll need to pay them monthly. So if they're part of the team, I would consider them here, even if they're not officially part of your payroll. But you can use the contractor section, the professional services section here for other, like legal, like accounting, other contractors that you hire. Notice how all of the rows and all the names here are blue, so they're very much open for you to adjust and change. For most of these, we assume that they're going to be recurring expenses. So for example, notice that when you add an expense to accounting, let's say $500 a month, the model will just drag that number to the future. If you change it, it'll also just drag the change to the future. Because what the model is doing is essentially taking the last row and just scaling that to the future. If you zero it out, it will zero out and you'll only have that expense for a certain period of time. You can of course overwrite this. This is just kind of like a simple formula hack, assuming that when you add an expense here, it's going to be an ongoing thing. But there's very much the possibility that you'll run a campaign 1 month, say a $1,000 campaign here, not run it again in the months after, and then rerun it here. So those are kind of like manual one-off month expenses. The names of the categories are also changeable. While some of them have some predefined names, Slight Bean is in there, insurance, you can change these to whatever you want. And that will also adjust it in the summary here, and it will also adjust it in the monthly statement here. So the source of this name is always the line itself, and it is open for adjustment. These are just placeholders. Normally what you want to do is try and sync these values with your P&L. So your P&L will normally be classified in names that look more or less like this. So you can even work with your accounting team to make sure that they're synced and that you classify everything into these categories just to keep things simple. Our team can even help you sync your P&L. If you have a large number of expenses, if you're operating already, there's a good chance that doing this manually, like bringing in the inputs and syncing your model, is very unsustainable. So that's where our team can jump in and help. Now, the last note I'll talk about is this drop down here, where you can choose what category each expense belongs to. These categories are sourced from the settings sheet here, where you can define spanning categories. These are also blue, so these are all placeholders that you can change. And then from that, notice that here in the staff sheet, you can choose which category of team, which expense category each team member belongs to. And here in the Sg&A, you can define which category each of these belongs to. And the way that connects is, let me add maybe a couple of expenses that are in different categories just to show you. So we'll say the CMO is part of the operations team, and we'll say senior marketing is part of the growth team, and maybe we'll say there's a legal expense here, like an ongoing retainer with your lawyers. So let's set that to $750 and call that legal. So notice how here in the dashboard, this pie chart gets redesigned or repainted based on the use of funds for the first 18 months and for the current month. So the current month you can use as a drop down here to say, well, yeah, let's look how expenses are looking in May, or how expenses are looking in April of next year. And it'll show you that snapshot of the company. But these are mostly useful for your pitch deck. Many investors will request kind of like a breakdown of use of funds. So that's why we have that functionality in the model for you to be able to kind of keep an eye and control and understand where your expenses are going for, especially if you're raising money for investors. And that's all for the Sg&A sheet. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to our team.